her tiny trembling arms locked around his charcoal suit, the scent of her mother's cheap soap clashing with his $1,000 cologne, as she whispered the words that turned his empire to ash. "I don't need money. I just need a hug, Daddy." The penthouse of the Sterling Heights Tower did not feel like a home. It felt like a vault. Everything was polished to a mirror finish, designed so that Sterling Vance could see himself in every surface, if he ever bothered to look. The air was filtered, chilled, and entirely devoid of the smells of life. Zenzile moved through the sprawling living area with the practiced silence of someone who had spent a lifetime trying not to be noticed. She was a woman of iron grace, her dark skin a stark contrast to the white marble floors she scrubbed on her hands and knees. In the hierarchy of this house, she was less than the furniture. The furniture was insured, while she was merely replaceable. But today, Zenzile's shadow was twice as large. "Stay behind the velvet curtains, Amara," Zenzile hissed, her voice a frantic vibration. "If Mr. Vance catches a glimpse of you, we are back on the street. Do you understand?" Not a sound. Amara, only 7 years old, nodded with a gravity that no child should possess. She sat tucked behind a heavy drape, her legs pulled to her chest. In her small, dark hands, she clutched a tattered piece of paper, a birth certificate with a father's name left blank, and a single grainy photograph she had stolen from her mother's wooden box. At the far end of the room, Sterling Vance sat at a desk made of petrified wood. He was the king of New York real estate, a man whose smile never reached his eyes and whose heart was rumored to be made of the same steel he used to build his towers. He was currently tearing into a subordinate over a speakerphone, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "I don't care about the community center, Marcus," Sterling snapped. "I care about the square footage. Level it. We're building luxury condos, not a playground." Before we dive deeper into the secret that could crumble Sterling's empire, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the twist coming in the next act. Zenzile's heart hammered against her ribs as she worked. She had worked for Sterling for 3 years, and for 3 years, she had carried the weight of a secret that felt like swallowing glass. She had met him long before the towers, back when he was a hungry developer, and she was a girl with dreams that hadn't yet been crushed by the reality of a visa status and a lack of options. Sterling didn't look at Zenzile as she refilled his water carafe. He didn't notice the way her hand shook or the way she lingered a second too long, searching for a trace of the man he used to be. To him, she was just the help, a silent utility that kept his world sparkling. Suddenly, the silence of the room was broken by a soft thud. Amara had dropped her pencil. It rolled across the marble, clicking rhythmically until it tapped against the leg of Sterling's desk. Sterling froze. The person on the other end of the phone continued to ramble, but Sterling wasn't listening. He slowly turned his head. His eyes, cold and sharp as diamonds, landed on the heavy velvet curtain. "Zenzile," he said, his voice dangerously low. "What is behind that curtain?" Zenzile's face went ash-gray. It's nothing, Mr. Vance. Draft. I'll see to it." "Zenzile," he repeated, standing up. He was a tall man, imposing and broad-shouldered. "I pay for absolute privacy. If you've brought someone into my home." Before Zenzile could move, Amara stepped out. She didn't look afraid. She looked expectant. Her dark curls were tied back with a simple yellow ribbon, and her eyes, the exact same amber-flecked eyes that Sterling saw in the mirror every morning, were fixed on his face. Sterling stopped mid-stride. The air seemed to exit the room. He looked at the girl, then at Zenzile, then back at the girl. The resemblance was undeniable. It was a biological ghost, haunting his pristine office. "Who is this?" Sterling demanded, though his voice lacked its usual bite. There was a flicker of something, guilt or perhaps just the shock of a long-buried memory, crossing his features. "This is Amara," Zenzile whispered, stepping forward to shield her daughter, her pride finally winning over her fear. "And you know exactly who she is, Sterling." Sterling's jaw tightened. He looked at the child as if she were a hostile takeover. He didn't see a daughter, he saw a scandal. He saw a headline that would tank his stock price. He saw a mistake from a summer he had tried to buy his way out of years ago. He reached for his desk, pulling out a sleek leather-bound checkbook. He unscrewed the cap of a gold fountain pen. "I told you back then, Zenzile. I told you I wasn't a family man," he said, his voice regaining its cold, transactional edge. "I've been generous with your salary, but if you're looking for a settlement, let's just do it now and be done with it." He scribbled a number on the check, a number with enough zeros to change a person's life, and tore it off. He held it out toward Amara, not even looking her in the eye. "Here," Sterling said. "Take this. Get her whatever she wants. A new house, a car, a private school. Just keep this quiet." Amara looked at the piece of paper. To her it was just a scrap of trash. She didn't see the fortune, she saw the man holding it. She saw the father she had drawn in her sketchbook, the one who was supposed to protect her from the dark. She didn't take the check. Instead, Amara walked past the hand holding the money. She stepped into the circle of his space, her small boots clicking on the marble. Sterling flinched as she reached out, but he didn't pull away. With a soft sob of relief, Amara buried her face in his waist, her tiny arms straining to reach around his torso. She gripped the fabric of his suit like a life raft in a storm. "I don't need money," she cried into the silence of the vault. "I just need a hug, Daddy." In the background, the check fluttered from Sterling's nerveless fingers, landing in the dust he had paid Zenzile to clean away. The world inside the penthouse fractured. The high-definition silence that Sterling Vance paid millions to maintain was shattered by the rhythmic, shuddering sobs of a child who had finally found the man she had been looking for in the dark. Sterling stood frozen, his arms hovering in the air like a man surrendering at gunpoint. His body was a map of tension. He was a man who lived by the rule of no contact. In his world, touch was a handshake, a legal binding, a cold exchange of palm and sweat. This was different. This was visceral. Amara's small face was pressed against the Italian silk of his vest, and he could feel the dampness of her tears soaking through to his skin. It was an invasion of the most intimate kind. Zenzile stood by the door, her hands clutched so tightly they had turned a pale, ghostly gray at the knuckles. She was caught between the instinct to snatch her daughter away and the desperate, dying hope that Sterling might finally feel the pulse of his own blood. "Amara, let go," Zenzile whispered, her voice cracking. "Let go right now." But Amara didn't let go. She squeezed harder, her tiny fingers digging into Sterling's back. "You didn't come," she whimpered, her voice muffled by his shirt. "I waited at the gate every day after school. Mom said you were busy building the world, but I told her you just forgot the way home." Sterling's eyes flickered to Zenzile, a sharp, accusatory look. "What have you been telling her?" he hissed, though the venom was dampened by the sheer weight of the girl clinging to him. "The truth," Zenzile said, her stature beginning to return, her chin rising. "That her father is a man who thinks he is a god. That he builds towers so high he can't see the people on the ground. I never told her your name, Sterling. She found it herself." Sterling looked down at the top of Amara's head. He saw the yellow ribbon, frayed at the edges. He saw the way her small shoulders heaved with every breath. For a fleeting second, the billionaire mask slipped. He remembered a night 7 years ago, a humid night in a small apartment far from this glass cage, where he had promised a different woman that he would never let her down. He had lied to her, and in doing so, he had lied to himself. He looked at the check lying on the floor. It was $1 million piece of paper, and yet, in the face of this child's embrace, it looked like a candy wrapper. It had no power here. "Amara," Sterling said, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears, soft, hesitant, and stripped of its corporate steel. He didn't hug her back, not yet, but he didn't pull away. He looked at his own hand, the one wearing the hawk-crested ring. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, he lowered his hand. He touched the top of her head. The hair was soft, smelling of cheap chamomile shampoo and the rain outside. The contacts sent a jolt through him. It wasn't the deal he wanted to make. It was the debt he hadn't realized he owed. "I didn't forget the way home," Sterling lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I got lost in the clouds." Amara pulled back just an inch, looking up at him with tear-streaked eyes that were terrifyingly perceptive. "Are you back now?" she asked. "Can we go home? Mom's back hurts, and the basement is cold." Sterling looked at Zenzile. The maid. The woman who scrubbed his floors while raising his legacy in a cellar. The subtext of the moment was a suffocating pressure. If he acknowledged her as a daughter, he acknowledged his own monstrous negligence. If he pushed her away, he killed the only thing in this room that was actually alive. His phone buzzed on the desk. An alert for the board meeting. Billions at stake, the screen screamed in glowing letters. Sterling looked at the phone, then back at the girl who was waiting for an answer that a check couldn't provide. The catalyst had been sparked, the chemical reaction of his life had begun, and there was no way to stop the explosion. "Zenzile," Sterling said, his voice regaining a bit of its cold command, though it wavered at the edges. "Pack her things. Yours. We need to talk." Not as employer and employee. Zenzile didn't move. "Is this another bribe, Sterling? Are you moving us to a better cage so we're easier to hide?" "It's not a cage," Sterling snapped, but then he caught the look in Amara's eyes, the pure, unadulterated hope. He softened his tone, his hand still resting awkwardly on the girl's shoulder. "It's a beginning. Maybe." But as he spoke, his eyes drifted back to the security cameras on his desk monitor. 2 black SUVs were pulling up to the private entrance. His legal team. His fixers. The men who made problems go away. The gut punch wasn't just the hug. It was the realization that Sterling Vance was about to have to choose between his empire and the girl who didn't want a cent of it. The air in the penthouse, once sterile and thin, now felt heavy with the scent of a brewing storm. Sterling stood in the center of the room, anchored to the floor by Amara's small hands, while Zenzile watched him like a lioness deciding whether to strike or retreat. The 2 black SUVs on the monitor were idling, their tinted windows reflecting the cold Manhattan sun. "The lawyers are here, Sterling," Zenzile said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. She walked over to the desk and picked up the check he had dropped. She didn't look at the amount. She simply held it between 2 fingers like a piece of contaminated medical waste. "They aren't here for a family reunion. They're here for a cleanup." Sterling felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine, a sensation he hadn't felt since his first multi-million-dollar closing. He looked at the monitor, then at the elevator doors. "I didn't call them for this, Zenzile. They're here for the merger. The community center deal." "Then send them away," Amara whispered, her eyes wide and trusting. "Stay here. Tell me about the hawk on your ring." The silence that followed was deafening. Technique 5, the unspoken tension, vibrated through the room. Sterling knew that every second he spent in this room with a child who called him Daddy was a second he was losing his grip on his legacy. If his board of directors saw this, if the press got wind of the maid's secret daughter, the merger would collapse. He would be seen as a liability, a man whose private life was a minefield of scandals. "I can't just send them away, Amara," Sterling said, his voice tightening. He gently detached her hands from his waist. The loss of her warmth felt like a sudden drop in temperature. "Business doesn't stop because of this." He turned to Zenzile, his eyes pleading for a silence he knew he didn't deserve. "Take her to the secondary lounge. The one with the theater. Give her whatever she wants. I just need an hour to fix this." "Fix what, Sterling?" Zenzile stepped into his space, her presence suddenly dwarfing his. "Are you going to fix the fact that she exists? Or are you going to fix the paperwork so she officially doesn't?" "I'm trying to protect us," Sterling roared, the sound echoing off the glass walls. Amara flinched, retreating a step, her lip trembling. The silence returned, sharper this time. Sterling saw the fear in his daughter's eyes, the same fear he had seen in the mirror when his own father had looked at him like an inconvenient expense. He felt a pang of genuine agony, a crack in the steel of his heart. The elevator chimed. "Mr. Vance." A voice came through the intercom. It was Marcus, his lead attorney. "We're coming up. We have the final signatures for the demolition. We need to move fast if we're going to beat the morning news cycle." Sterling looked at the door, then at Zenzile. "Please," he mouthed. Zenzile looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. She grabbed Amara's hand. "Come, sweetheart. Let's go to the other room. Let the big man play with his blocks." As they disappeared behind the heavy mahogany doors of the West Wing, the main elevator doors slid open. 3 men in identical Navy suits stepped out, carrying briefcases that held the power to erase neighborhoods and build fortunes. "Sterling," Marcus said, stepping forward, his eyes scanning the room with the efficiency of a predator. He paused, his gaze landing on the floor. He leaned down and picked up the crumpled check. $1 million. In the middle of the floor. "Either you're more stressed than I thought, or we have a leak." Marcus's eyes drifted to the spilled coffee on the table, the damp spot on Sterling's vest, and the small yellow hair ribbon that had fallen from Amara's hair during the hug. "Sterling," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Where is the maid?" "She's cleaning the back rooms," Sterling said. His voice steady, but his hands gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. "And the child?" Marcus asked, stepping closer. "The one we saw on the lobby feed. The one who looks exactly like the girl from that unfortunate summer in the Hamptons 7 years ago." The stakes were no longer just emotional. They were existential. Sterling realized that his fortress was compromised from the inside out. His own fixers had been tracking his liabilities, long before he even knew they existed. "She's my daughter," Sterling said. The words felt like a confession and a death sentence all at once. Marcus didn't blink. He just laid the demolition papers on the desk. "No, Sterling. She's a PR nightmare. And if you want this merger to go through, she needs to be gone by sunset. No hugs, no checks, just gone." The tension in the room was so thick it felt like physical pressure. Sterling looked at the papers, then at the door where Amara was waiting for her daddy to come back. He could hear the faint sound of a cartoon playing in the other room, the sound of a life he was being told to destroy. The air in the office was cold enough to frost. Marcus stood like a vulture, his pen hovering over the demolition papers, while the 2 other associates remained by the elevator. Human barriers between Sterling and the life he had almost claimed. "You're asking me to erase my own blood," Sterling whispered, the words vibrating with a newfound jagged edge. "I'm asking you to protect the 50,000 employees whose pensions rely on this merger," Marcus countered, his voice a smooth, oily caress. "Think about the scale, Sterling. 1 child's feelings versus the survival of your legacy. You've spent 40 years building this. Are you going to let a maid and a 7-year-old tear it down in 40 minutes? Sterling looked at the mahogany doors. He could almost feel Amara's presence on the other side, her small heart full of the impossible belief that he was a hero. He thought of the hug, the way her smallness had made his vast empire feel suddenly, strangely hollow. Then he looked at the pen. Technique 9, authentic dialogue, took a back seat to Technique 5, subtext. The silence in the room was a battleground. Sterling's hand reached out, his fingers trembling as they closed around the cold gold of the fountain pen. "The non-disclosure agreement is in the blue folder," Marcus said, sensing victory. "Zenzile signs, she takes a larger settlement, and they are on a plane to Johannesburg by midnight. Out of sight, out of mind. You can send gifts. You can be a benefactor. Just not a father." Sterling looked at the signature line. This was the moment of the critical choice. He could hear the faint, muffled sound of Amara laughing at something on the TV. It was a bright, silver sound that didn't belong in a room made of shadows. Suddenly the door swung open. It wasn't Amara. It was Zenzile. She hadn't stayed in the lounge. She stood there, her coat already on, her face a mask of devastating clarity. She had heard enough. "Don't bother with the pens, Sterling," Zenzile said, her voice echoing with a dignity that made the lawyers look small. "I told her you were busy. I told her you had to save the world." Amara peered out from behind her mother's skirt, her eyes searching Sterling's face for the man she had hugged just minutes ago. She saw the pen. She saw the cold men in suits. She saw the way her daddy wouldn't look her in the eye. "Sterling." Amara's voice was a fragile thread. "Are the bad men gone yet?" Sterling looked at her then, and the billionaire finally died. The glass fortress of his ego shattered. He dropped the pen. It hit the marble with a sharp clack, splattering black ink across the white stone like a bloodstain. "No, Amara," Sterling said, his voice breaking. "The bad man is still here. He's standing right behind this desk." He stepped around the obsidian table, ignoring Marcus's hissed warnings. He ignored the liabilities and the pensions and the market share. He knelt on the hard floor, ruining the crease of his trousers, and opened his arms. "I don't want the merger," Sterling said, loud enough for the lawyers and the gods to hear. "I don't want the tower." Amara didn't run to him this time. She stayed by her mother, her small face clouded with a sudden, agonizing maturity. She saw the ink on the floor. She saw the way the other men looked at her mother. "You're lying," Amara whispered, her voice trembling. "You want the money. Everyone wants the money." "I don't," Sterling pleaded, reaching out. "Amara, I choose you." "But they don't," she said, pointing at Marcus and the others. In that moment the power dynamic shifted. Sterling realized that he couldn't just choose her and have everything be okay. The world he had built was a machine designed to grind people like Zenzile and Amara into dust, and he was the one who had turned the key. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice now a threat. "If you don't sign those papers and remove these people from the premises, the board will trigger the morality clause. You'll be out by Monday. You'll have nothing." Sterling looked at his daughter. He looked at the life he could have, a life of basement apartments and cold nights, but with a heart that beat for someone other than himself. Or he could keep the gold and lose the soul. He stood up, his face hardening. He walked to Marcus, but he didn't take the pen. He took the demolition papers and the NDA, and with a slow, deliberate motion, he tore them in half, then in quarters. "Get out," Sterling said. "You're making a mistake," Marcus hissed, signaling the associates. "$1 million mistake." "No," Sterling said, looking back at Amara, who was finally slowly moving toward him. "I'm making a person." As the lawyers retreated to the elevator, Sterling turned to Amara. He expected a hug. He expected the happy end, where the music swells and the credits roll. But as the elevator doors closed, Zenzile stepped forward and pulled Amara back. "It's too late, Sterling," Zenzile said, her eyes wet with tears. "You chose the tower for 7 years. You can't just tear it down in a minute and expect us to stand in the ruins with you." The climax wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. The silence that followed the lawyer's departure was heavier than the noise of their threats. The penthouse felt cavernous, a museum of expensive things that suddenly looked like junk. Sterling stood in the center of the room, his hands empty, his heart exposed for the first time in his adult life. "I tore the papers, Zenzile," Sterling said, his voice a ghost of its former power. "I gave it all up. Doesn't that count for something?" Zenzile looked at the shredded documents littering the white marble. "It counts for a moment of conscience, Sterling. But a moment doesn't erase 7 years of silence. It doesn't fix the way Amara looks at the door every night, wondering if the man in the photo is ever coming to save her." Amara stood between them, a small bridge between two broken worlds. She looked at the hawk ring on Sterling's finger, then at the ink-stained floor. The happy end was a ghost that had already left the room. "I don't want to live here," Amara whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's too quiet. It smells like nothing." Sterling felt a sharp, twisting pain in his chest, a physical manifestation of regret. He realized that his wealth hadn't just separated him from the world, it had made him toxic to the very people he wanted to hold. He had spent his life building walls, and now that he wanted to tear them down, he realized they were the only thing holding him up. "Where will you go?" Sterling asked. "To a place where we don't have to hide behind curtains," Zenzile said. She took Amara's hand and began to walk toward the private service elevator, the one the staff used, the one Sterling never looked at. "Wait," Sterling called out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring, the silver hawk, the symbol of the Vance legacy. He held it out not as a bribe but as a piece of himself. "At least take this. So you know. So you know I didn't forget." Zenzile stopped. She looked at the ring, then at Sterling's desperate, aging face. She didn't take it. She leaned down and whispered something into Amara's ear. Amara walked back to Sterling. She didn't hug him this time. The bridge had been burned. Instead, she reached out and gently closed his hand over the ring, forcing his fingers back into a fist. "Keep it, Daddy," she said, the title now sounding more like a goodbye than a plea. "You might need it to buy a new tower. We already have everything we need." As the elevator doors chimed and closed, Sterling Vance was left alone in his glass fortress. The lights of the city began to flicker on below him, thousands of tiny lives glowing in the dark, and for the first time, he realized he wasn't looking down on them. He was looking at a world he no longer belonged to. He walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. He was a billionaire with a broken empire, a father with no daughter, and a man who finally understood that the most expensive things in life are the ones you can't buy back. The story of the Vane legacy ended not with a merger, but with a smudge of ink on a marble floor and a yellow ribbon left behind on a velvet chair. "Gandhi, what did you think of Sterling's choice? Do you think he deserved a second chance, or was it too little, too late?" Let us know your thoughts and tell us what city or country you're watching from in the comments below.